Good evening and welcome. My name is Bob Strong. On behalf of the Johnson Program in Leadership and Integrity, I want to welcome you to a conversation with the Commissioner of the National Football League, Roger Goodell. I'm going to have someone else introduce him in just a minute. I want to say a few things about what we're doing this evening. This isn't a speech, it isn't a lecture. We're going to do question and answer for the whole evening session. Eventually, and it won't take too long, you'll be able to participate in that conversation. But we are going to ask you, after some of the panelists on the stage have had a chance to start our discussion, to come up and line up at the microphone at the end of the aisle. Here in Lee Chapel, it's very hard to hear questions unless you use the microphone. So that's coming up in a few minutes. We're going to start by asking some of the people on stage to begin the discussion and ask the first questions. Jen Hathorn, the Director of Athletics at Washington Lee, is with us. She was instrumental in inviting some of our student athletes. Josh Gonzalez is a senior and a swimmer. Catherine Reed, a sophomore and a member of the tennis team. And Ty Perino is a senior who spent 4 years, I think, on the football team as a receiver. We also have Professor Bernard Jackson in the philosophy department, who this spring is teaching a class titled The Philosophy of Sport. Philosophy is one of those words you can teach of anything. Politics is another one of those. Economics is another one of those. The philosophy of sport should be a really interesting course this spring term. I'd like to call on Bill Goodell to introduce our guest. Bill Goodell is a graduate of Washington and Lee's School of Law. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees, and as you might guess, he is largely or partly responsible for this evening's program. I'd like to have Bill Goodell introduce our speaker.
Good evening. I'm thrilled to be able to return to campus tonight and bring one of my baby brothers back.
Take it easy what you say now.
I'll be very gentle, unlike growing up.
That's a fair comment.
More pertinent than the introduction that Bob gave me, I am a graduate of the law school almost 30 years ago, as was my wife, and spent the better part of 2 decades coming back with law counsel service and board of trustees service, which I am, I think, being gratefully retired from in a matter of a few weeks. But more pertinent to all of you, I am Jackie Goodell's father, the junior, and also, I don't know if any law students are here, but Roger and I have a cousin here in the third-year law student. There he is back there, Jesse Rappel. So we're all thrilled to have Roger come to campus, and it's taken all of us to pull him here. I'd like to just give you a little sense of Roger's determination and what it takes to succeed in life. And I think it's particularly pertinent in the present economic environment, as many of you all are struggling to think about, the seniors at least, where they're going to find a job. When Roger graduated from the other Washington college, Washington and Jefferson, the economic climate in the early 80s was roughly the same as it is today. Very difficult to find a job. And Roger, as a top student there, was successful in landing a job in the management training program at a big steel company in Pittsburgh. And after spending almost, I guess, 6 months there, it was a time when the steel mills were going through tremendous layoffs. And Roger decided that it really wasn't fun to go to work, it wasn't rewarding to go to work, and that wasn't where his heart led him. And so he left that management training position, good secure position, and went to essentially volunteer as an intern at the National Football League. And that was in 1982. he worked his way up from pretty much an intern job all the way up to Chief Operating Officer in 2001 and became the 8th Commissioner of the National Football League in 2006. When Bob and I were talking about people to come speak here to the Johnson Scholars Program, and I had given him a list of some other names, and I mentioned kind of abashedly at the end, well, we might also get my brother to come speak here. And I really felt Roger was an appropriate speaker for this series and for the Johnson Scholars Program because in his very short tenure as commissioner, he's already set some very high bars for expectations from the player conduct, his civility, honor, and integrity. So I'm very thrilled and pleased to present to you my brother, Roger Goodell.
That was much nicer than I expected. Yeah.
Well, my question has to do with your background as a liberal arts student at Washington Jefferson. I thought it would be pertinent to ask a question related to this because there are many, many people here, as you know, we're a liberal arts institution, who possibly might be aspiring to do something like you're doing, and they're a liberal arts graduate. So if you could give us some sense of how your liberal arts education prepared you to be the CEO of a major corporation, I think it might be maybe inspiring as well as enlightening to many of our audience.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I guess the best way to answer that question is I think the liberal arts education is the best because you really get exposed to a variety of different ways to think about the world. And you're at a young age, you don't really, maybe you do, and you're fortunate enough to know exactly what you want to do in life. But to be able to understand the world, the broader world, and understand different disciplines, different industries, different perspectives on the world, I think will serve all of you well as you go forward. So I was a big believer of having a broader set of perspectives before I decided what I really wanted to do. On the other hand, I was pretty focused on becoming part of the National Football League in some form, so I was fortunate. But that education gave me the background to be able to take on a variety of different responsibilities throughout my career, and I think served me well. But the two things that I always say about going to college that I think are most important is learn how to learn and learn how to deal with people, because those are two things and two skill sets that you'll never stop using. And once you stop learning, you need to move on and do something else.
Was there a particular discipline that you studied that you feel like you rely on most in your everyday job, or is it
Yes, and I think it's something that's instilled in you not only by college, but also by your family and by the people you surround yourself with, which is doing the right thing. You know, at any point in your life, you're going to have to make decisions about what you do, how you do it, and you got to do the right thing. You're going to have a lot of pressures, you're going to have a lot of stress. People will try to influence you, but you know, at the end of the day, you got to close the door and try to decide what's right.
Thanks.
My question sort of deals with steroids, but in general, why do you think that the NFL, over the course of, it seems like it's avoided a lot of the scandals that other professional organizations have had to deal with, fixing games, steroids. And I was wondering if there are certain characteristics of either the organization or present and past leaders that have contributed to that. And I was wondering if you could talk about that for a little.
Well, it is a tribute to the people who have led the league over the years, that they have had the foresight to address issues in advance of them becoming a scandal, to use your word, or to address issues before they become a problem. And I think previous commissioners, our ownership. I also give a great deal of credit to our Players Association, particularly as it relates to the steroid policy and our personal conduct policy, because they were critical. And you saw what's happened in other sports. There's been resistance from the Players Association to drug testing, and it's, you know, a violation of civil liberties, and there are a lot of views out there. But I think our players recognized that it was best for the sport, that there was no use of performance-enhancing drugs, and they were very quick to come and to create a policy. And I think one of the reasons we've avoided that is we've been testing for these drugs for over 20 years, and other sports haven't. And I think that has been a recognition of our leadership and a recognition that we are trying to address a very real issue. And it's something you always have to stay current with, because it changes dramatically. Anytime you establish a rule, somebody tries to break it. And everyone's going to try to find a way around that rule. And we were talking about it at dinner. And it's an important issue for us, in getting people to understand that we have integrity and our games are played within the rules and our athletes play within the rules. And it's also a health issue. It's a very serious health issue. So we don't want younger people to be taking performance-enhancing drugs. It's a bad message for younger generations, and it's something that should be avoided.
Thank
you. My question for you is, with the current economic situation, what kind of impact is that going to have on the building of new stadiums, or the size of the stadiums, different sponsorships given, things like that?
Catherine, it's a good question. We're not immune to what's going on out in the world as far as the economy is concerned. It's what's happening in our world right now is I think affecting everybody, and is going to require a sacrifice on behalf of everybody. And I like to put it into three buckets. It affects us directly. For instance, our credit ratings, our ability to get credit in this kind of a market. We are financing stadiums, to your point. Banks are giving us loans. It's costing us more money to get those loans now. So we have a direct impact. In addition, we had to take the very difficult step this year of releasing a number of our employees. And that's very hard to do. And it has never been done before in the NFL. So that was a very difficult step for us. The second is our partners. You know, our sponsors, our licensees, they're all looking at their costs. They're all looking at how they're spending their money and their resources. And you have to be sensitive to that, and you have to find new ways of creating value. And the third, and probably most important, are our fans directly. They have less disposable income than they had last year. They have a lot less wealth in some cases than they had last year. And you have to make your product affordable, and you have to create new value for them. And that's why we continually look at what can we do to create more value for our fans to participate in the game. We're fortunate most of our fans experience NFL football through the television, and that's free in the NFL. All of our games are on free television, and that makes us unique in professional sports. And I think one of the reasons why our popularity is skyrocketing.
We were kind of discussing it at dinner, and it was brought up about the Michael Vick situation, but it's just in more of a broad aspect. We mentioned just all the various interest groups and different people that you have to take into consideration in your day-to-day operations, and how much of running the NFL is approaching it from like a business. It's running a business, but also at the same time, how much of it is just trying to protect the sanctity of the game?
It's a good question, Ty. I look at my first responsibility as being protecting the integrity of the game. If we lose the trust of our fan base, that we do not have integrity and that the games are not played within the rules, that's very difficult to ever get back. And so my first responsibility is to the game. I'm hired by the owners, so I have a responsibility to the owners, and you know, my job function to some extent is like a CEO in many cases, but it's also like Speaker of the House, in the sense that I have to get 24 our 32 owners to vote in favor of anything in particular I want to do, of any significant consequences, new television contracts, changing the structure of our season, getting a new collective bargaining. I have to convince 24 owners that that's the right thing to do. That's more political probably than anything. I look at that as a challenge and a value, because we have 32 owners that all bring different experience, all have their own sense of what's right and wrong. And we have to convince them of what we think is the right thing. And if I can build a consensus of 24, then it's usually a pretty good decision. And so I like that challenge, and I like having those kind of resources behind me. So it's a challenge every day for us to be able to manage that, but it's also a benefit of why I think the NFL achieves such success.
You all have to excuse me, I'm still trying to breathe. Mr. Goodell gave me his piece of cheesecake, so I had two. So.
Remember, Professor, I gave that to you so you take it easy on me.
That's right. All right. So professional football is clearly an enterprise that seeks to entertain its audience. Nevertheless, it seems that the NFL hopes that its players behave responsibly. As commissioner of this enterprise, Roger, how do you counsel players as to what constitutes, and I'll call this responsible entertainment?
Well, it's not just players to me. Commissioners have the same responsibility, coaches, players, anyone associated with the NFL, I think has responsibility back to the game. It's something we talked a little bit about at dinner, which is institutional thinking. We have the good fortune of being associated with the NFL, and we won't be here for long. People are going to move on. Players are going to stop playing and move on. I won't be commissioner for the rest of my life. So we'll move on. And we have a responsibility to get back to that game and to make the game better than it was when we came into it. And I think anything that reflects poorly on the game or on the institution or on the NFL is unfortunate for the people who are a part of that. And the thing that I get most frustrated about with our player conduct is that our players are virtually, all of them are wonderful young men. They do great things in their community, and when you have a couple that don't behave responsibly, it reflects poorly on all of them, and people make assumptions about them and they stereotype them. And I think that's a very unfortunate thing, because I'm very proud of the things that they do in their community. And so they have to recognize that it's a privilege to play in this league, but that comes with the responsibility, and that responsibility is something they'll be held accountable for, because it reflects on all of us, and it most importantly reflects on the brand of the NFL. That shield is something I talk about. Do not reflect poorly on that shield.
Given what you just said, do you think that the NFL gives too many chances to players in terms of player conduct? I mean, we're all following, maybe Vic will come back. You gave Pac-Man Jones another chance. Do you think, would it be easier just to be completely strict and say, no, you have no chance of coming back? You've tarnished the image of the NFL? Well,
it might be easier, but I'm not sure it's practical, because I think, the reality in our world is people make mistakes, and there isn't anybody in this room that hasn't made mistakes and probably won't make more mistakes. And I think you have to recognize those are going to happen, but you also have to be held accountable for them, and you have to recognize their consequences for what you do. And I think every player should be held accountable for that. One of the focuses of our personal conduct policy is to focus on multiple offenders. So if you make a single mistake, our general philosophy is we will let the legal process to run out before we would make a judgment. After the first incident, you don't have that privilege any longer. You've lost that privilege. And I accept that a mistake can happen and that people are going to make mistakes. And if you're genuine and you recognize those mistakes and you can move forward and live a better life and something that can make a positive difference in communities. And so many of our players do that. They make mistakes, but they become very positive influences. That's a better story than a failure to me. So we're not rooting for failure, we're rooting for success. So if we can help someone create a more positive influence, I believe that's a good thing to do, and I think our society should do that more frequently than root for failures.
When dealing with these players and their actions, what factors do you take into consideration or into account when, be it monetary or suspension for, first time people with their first offense, or position on the team, or salary?
It's a good question because there's no magic answer to that. There have to be consequences, though. I hate to use the analogy, but I have 7-year-old twins, and when they do something wrong, they have to recognize that they've done something wrong, and there are consequences for that. Not that they listen to me very often, but they have to understand that. And the same is true for anybody else. We have to understand their consequences for our actions. And I look at whether they've had a prior history. I try to understand all of the facts surrounding the case. I look at what's going to change the behavior going forward, which is the most significant thing. You're not doing this just to punish somebody. You're doing this to change the behavior going forward. So you look to see what will have the greatest impact on this individual or individuals or the team. Because a lot of my job is disciplining teams too, by the way. And you have to take all those factors into consideration and do what you think is right. And you want to have consistency. You want people to understand for a particular consequence, X is going to happen. But one thing we've recognized is that the impact of being removed from the game, whether that's on the field, if there's an incident on the field, fighting as an example, we tell our officials you can pull them off the field, or a suspension of someone, there's no impact that's greater than that. They do not want to miss an opportunity to perform on that field. So that is something we've found to be the most effective. But if we can educate people and make sure that they avoid those mistakes, that's what we prefer to do. I must say, this is not my full-time job, though. I do a lot of other things other than discipline. So.
This past offseason, when the NFL made the rule changes that were ultimately aimed at making the game safer and limiting injuries, but then there's also the, talks or rumors about possibly expanding the season or getting rid of the 2 preseason games. I was just wondering if at any time, does that not seem almost contradictory, just adding those 2 games, lengthening the season? I know as a football player, I've only played 10 games, and it's hard enough to make it through a 10-game season. So I guess those rule changes, were those seen as a more preemptive attempt at limiting injuries, and then I guess that would go in accord with the addition of the 2 games, that would allow for those 2 extra games to go on?
No, Ty, there's really no correlation to them other than every year we go back and look and see what we can do to make our game safer for the people who play it. We want the players to be on the field. We want them to be as safe as possible. And we look at techniques that they might be engaged with during any given season, and they develop. There becomes a trend, and we call it a copycat league because people see other things that are happening. The best example is a horse collar tackle, which you're aware of, but it's essentially pulling a tackler back down from behind them by using their shoulder pads or jersey, and you can hurt someone's knees or legs very seriously. And we had some serious injuries. We made a rule immediately to eliminate that several years ago. It's still a struggle to get it out of the game, but it's a technique that will cause injuries. And if we can take any technique out that's going to cause injuries, that's good for the health of our players and good for the sport. It's a tough game and it's a rough game, so injuries are going to occur, but there are certain techniques that you'd like to avoid. Second, and also very important, is our concussions, head injuries, which we don't know everything about head injuries, and the brain is something you can't replace. You usually can't fix. So you have to be very careful about the long-term impacts. So we are trying to avoid particular techniques that could cause a head injury, a concussion, or multiple concussions. So we We have every year tried to change the game to make it safer. It doesn't change what we think is the quality of the game on the field. As far as the 17-18 season, our people have been doing some research, and it was interesting because they're playing a 20-game season now. We're not extending the season. We're taking 2 games that are meaningless, or potentially taking 2 games that are meaningless, and making them meaningful. And that goes back to the value point that I was raising earlier. We have to create more value for our fans. They're paying for those games right now. They don't like them. They don't reflect well on the NFL. They're not up to NFL standards. So we want to give them a better quality product. That's one way of doing that. And it's all within that 20-game format. But several years ago when we went from 14 games to 16 games, if you read the quotes that they said then, they're the exact same quotes you're reading today. You know, oh, can you play 2 more games? It's going to be a long season. You know, teams are doing that. And in fact, when we look at our injury data, the rate of injuries in the preseason and the regular season is the same. It's actually about half in the postseason after they played several games. So it may be the competitiveness, it may be a variety of factors, but right now, while we will look at that and we will continue to make our game safer, we think it's one way of creating great value and still staying within that 20-game format.
Let me invite members of the audience to begin lining up at the microphone. It'll shortly be your turn to ask questions. And our guest has said you're welcome to ask questions about any subject, the business side or the entertainment side, the sports connected with his enterprise. And
you can't have all boys, though. It's got to be, and no family members.
Please go ahead and start. I think that microphone is on. You'll know when you speak into it.
My question is 2 parts. First, since you've only been in the league as commissioner for, I guess, 3 years now, what do you want your legacy when you are done to be? And also, with the expansion of games into Canada and Europe, is that something you see as continuing, expanding, and is that something you want to make?
The first question, the first part of your question is an easy one because I don't think about my legacy at all. I think that's the last thing you do when you go into a job. You go in and you go and decide to do what you think is best for the game and what you think is right for the game and for the industry. So I have not thought for 1 second about my legacy. Legacies are for when you're done and you look back, and people are going to determine what my legacy is based on the performance of the NFL. And most legacies are determined by someone other than yourself. They're based on your reputation, your behavior, your performance, most importantly. So it's not something I think about for a second a day. On your second question, it's all about growing the game. It's all about expanding our game. We think we have a great game. The popularity of our game domestically here is at all-time highs, hopefully higher in the future. But we had 150 million people who watched the Super Bowl just in the United States last year. And we think that there's tremendous growth outside of the United States when people get exposed to our game. And they haven't had a chance to see it. It's one of the reasons we're playing regular season games in London for the last 2 years. And we were concerned with the economy, which is also impacting on the UK, that we would have less interest, less enthusiasm. We sold out 90,000 seats in about 4 hours at the UK. So there's an extraordinary interest. People are staying up in the middle of the night watching our games because of the time difference. So we believe there's great opportunities for us in the UK, Europe in general, Mexico, Canada also are important markets to us. And we're looking at the East, the Far East, Japan, China, as other growth opportunities for us. And with the new media opportunities, excuse me for saying new media, because to you it's not new media, but the digital media opportunities, you can reach these fans so much easier than you did in the past. So it's a great opportunity for us.
My question goes back to another answer you had before, speaking about the consensus building and getting 24 to 32 managers or owners to come to a consensus. And I was thinking with 32 of some of the nations in the world's richest people sitting in one room trying to come to a conclusion, what tactics would you say you employ to deal with I can imagine there's some pretty big heads with the Jerry Jones and the Bob Kraft sitting around and everybody thinking they're right.
You said that, not me.
So, I can imagine it'd be extremely difficult, though, to get everybody on the same page. Do you know, or any strategies you use to get people really trying to come to a consensus?
Yeah, the best strategy is to tell them they're all right. That works really well. But I think that, to me, the best strategy is listen. You have to give everyone an opportunity to speak. Everyone an opportunity to express how they feel about something. And be quite honest with you, usually the solution you're presenting is not the one that ultimately will get approved. And I argue the A, B, and C. You have an A as one of your recommendations. As an example, when you walk in a room, somebody else has a B, it's usually C, because somebody else brings a different perspective to it. They modify it, and most of the times they'll strengthen that. So you have an ability, if you listen, you have the right process, the people will be able to contribute to a solution, make it better, and at the end of the day, that will be something that will benefit the league greater. So don't assume you know all the answers, and don't assume it's going to come out this way you went into the room. Listen, have a strong process so people have the ability to have input to it, and strengthen what you're proposing.
Thank you.
I'm glad you didn't make me comment on the ego. So.
From a business perspective, how are you going to make sure that the NFL continues to hit its growth targets abroad while simultaneously protecting your competitive advantage domestically from new competitors like the USFL?
Well, I think the key issue is making sure your product stays strong. If your product is strong, then you're going to have demand for it, and you can never take your eye off that. Growth is important, but growth at the expense of compromising on your product is a recipe for disaster and will not lead to longer-term growth. So it's like the lengthening of the season, or if we played football on every night. One of the things that makes the NFL unique and I think exciting is that anticipation of the games are over now. We look forward to next weekend, and we spent a couple days talking about what happened last weekend, but now we're looking forward to the next weekend. And I think keeping your product where it's special, it's unique, and there's anticipation and demand for it is the greatest thing we can do, whether it's domestically or internationally. The growth is important, but as I say, not at the expense of the quality of your product. Does that answer your question?
It answers the first one.
What's the second one?
How are you going to protect your competitive advantage from new competitors like the USFL? What's going to keep your product unique?
I think that is the answer. I think it's the quality of it. To me, I think we can produce a better quality product than anybody else. So competition's fine. That only makes you better in my mind, whether it's on an athletic field or whether it's in business. Competition will make you better. It'll make you think better. It'll make you perform better. And the quality of our game, we have to keep recognizing, we have to improve that and look at new ways. Don't assume you have the best product or the best quality. You have to keep working at that and improving that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, being the commissioner of all 32 teams, do you have a favorite team? And do you root for them on Sundays?
Do you think I'm going to tell you if I do? It's a good question. You know, I grew up as a Colts fan when I was a kid. We grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was a huge Colts fan. As a matter of fact, one of my fond memories was Billy was a Jets fan, and in Super Bowl III, which is long before any of your time, the Colts, who were a big favorite in the Super Bowl, got beat by the Jets, and it was one of the most disappointing days I can remember in my life. But I was a Colts fan, and then when we moved from Washington to New York, I became a Redskin fan for some reason. But when you start working for the NFL, you really lose the individual interest in teams, and that it's not that I'm not a fan of the NFL, because I'm a huge fan and passionate about the NFL, but I'm not a fan of a particular team anymore, and you naturally lose it, interesting enough, and you root for great football, and you root for obviously the best team to win, but you don't have the same kind of fan interest that you might have as a general fan. But you got to be careful not to lose that passion for the game.
Thank you.
I've read some articles that mention that in a few years, I think it's 2011, that there may be a year without a salary cap in the NFL, and I was just curious as to like what factors that rides on, and if there was indeed a year with no salary cap, do you think that something would happen like you see in the MLB today, where teams from the biggest markets and the most money, you could just buy an all-star roster of players?
It's a very good question. There are two aspects to that. First is I don't think we'd become like the other sports because the fundamental economics of the NFL, we share 82% of our revenue. So you're close to the same revenue for the New York Giants in the #1 market as you are in Green Bay. And that's why the economics in the system has allowed us to have every team compete and have hope to win the Super Bowl. That's why we had 2 small markets in the Super Bowl this year, Arizona and Pittsburgh, because they have the same economic foundation to compete. The second piece of it is the uncapped year would be actually the 2010 year. The way our agreement works, it's the agreement with our players, what we call the collective bargaining agreement, and it's management union relationship. If we go into an uncapped year next year, there are a variety of rules that would restrict the current system. As an example, right now we have free agency after 4 years. That would automatically move to 6 years, so less players could leave a team and go to another team. Anyone who makes the playoffs would have certain limitations on them as far as signing players. You essentially can't sign a player unless you've lost a player. A number of other financial restrictions that would take place that would, I think, maintain the integrity of the game and help us keep the quality of the game at a very positive level. And I don't think it would have any dramatic impact or any impact, frankly, on what you see on the field. But we hope not to get there also. Our hope would be to get a long-term agreement with the players.
We all know football is an extremely violent game. And how would you deal with former players who have been injured tremendously by the game, as I know a lot have come out against saying they don't get enough aid? Do you think the NFL has a moral or ethical obligation to continue to help these players into the future? And do you think it's being done enough currently, or there needs to be more aid in the future?
I do think we have a moral and ethical responsibility to the players who played the game. I feel very strongly about that. The people who helped us build this game and the success, we have to honor, and we have a responsibility to them to address their issues. We have been very focused on the medical issues that our players have had. I think from a variety of standpoints. One is, it goes back to the earlier question, we've tried to make the game safer through our rules. We've tried to make the game safer through our equipment. And I also think the medical care is tremendous. You could not give better medical care than you could by being an NFL player. And I think the quality of medical care and the techniques that are used are so far advanced from where they were with a lot of our older time players. As an example, I hate to date myself, but when I went to college and hurt my knee, I was scheduled for arthroscopic surgery. That was a brand new technique. Back in the late 70s, they used to just rip your knee open. And most people wouldn't recover from it. You had a knee injury back in the 70s, you may never play the game again. And you'd probably have a variety of other problems, arthritis and a variety of other things because of the fact you open up that cavity. That's not happening nowadays. The medical care is so extraordinary and the techniques are so good that I don't think our current players or the players that recently played the game are going to see that as they get older. But I think we have to do more for our players that are having difficulties. We've created a program, as an example, a joint replacement program. Any player who ever played the game of football in the NFL can come get a joint replacement from the finest doctors, finest hospitals in the world. We picked 11 hospitals. We will pay for them to go have the surgery. We will pay for their rehabilitation. We pay for their families to get there. And we have, I think the last count I saw was 58 players that have taken us up on that. And we've also looked at screening for cardiovascular problems. A lot of people have focused on the fact that when our players stop playing, they're not exercising at the same level, but they may be eating at the same level. And that's not a good combination, as you could imagine. And we have done cardiovascular screening, and we've been able to find problems, potential problems that have been able to be addressed medically. We also do screening for prostate cancer. As a matter of fact, we started at the Hall of Fame last year. We found 4 players just at the Hall of Fame that have prostate cancer, including 1 player who is in the Hall of Fame that works on our staff. So we continue to look at what we can do to improve the medical care for our retired players, but we have to do more. We just have to keep dealing with that directly and make sure we understand the problems that they're facing and develop programs.
You mentioned earlier about the hard times and its impact on the game. Do you see any potential change in the blackout rules for this upcoming year based on that fact? Because as you alluded to earlier, it's good for the product if you have the ability to see the game and get involved with the game for free if you can't make it to the game. But with the blackout rules for small market teams, it seems to me that it sort of inhibits that.
I don't agree with your premise. Okay. First off, 98% of our games are sold out. Yeah. So it's 2% of the games, and they're not always the small markets. Mm-hmm. In fact, it sometimes is the reverse. So it's not a large market, small market issue. We're the only league that puts all our games on free television. The blackout rule extends back into the 70s, and it was established by Congress, and it's expired, but we continued to follow that rule going mm-hmm. back from the 70s, and we think it's responsible. It's a balance of running a business. We're not in the business of giving away our product. Mm-hmm. We want people to come to the stadium. We want people to buy tickets. That's what any business is in the business of doing. But you also want to grow your business, and by doing that, by giving our television rights to broadcast networks and having on free television, it exposes our game. So it's a good thing, and it's not that you won't see a football game. You just may not see your home team. Any given day. But the good news is, right now our ticket sales are doing quite well. We're going to have our bumps, but I also don't believe that you change fundamental policies and your fundamental values because of short-term issues. Mm-hmm. We're in this business for the long term. The NFL is going to be here well beyond this economic crisis that we're going through, and we should stick with what made us successful. And that policy is one of the fundamental policies.
Thanks.
I hope you see all the games next year.
Given that the NFL has not had a major work stoppage since the early 1980s, and all the other major sports leagues have had work stoppages in the past 15 or 16 years, could you comment on a couple reasons why you think the NFL has had a much more amicable relation with the Players Association than other major sports leagues?
Well, I can't comment on the other sports leagues because I'm not as involved. I can only comment on the NFL, and I think it's a combination of factors. I think we've recognized, and I think this is true with any management labor relationships, is that you have to grow the pie. That opportunities can be created if you work together. Too often negotiations about win-lose, and that doesn't serve the industry well. And we've seen that in many industries. There's a lot of industries that are crumbling under the cost of benefits or the increased cost of labor. You have to be careful. You have to be mindful of that. And I think the NFL owners have had that long-term view of making sure we don't get into agreements that are long-term are going to impact negatively on the game. And we had a 4-year extension with the Players Association, actually 6 years, but we had the ability, both sides had the ability to terminate the last 2 years. They did because they didn't feel this current agreement was working for the owners. And that was an option that both sides had. The owners exercised that option to get in and find a fair agreement. So you want both sides to benefit. Most importantly, you want to keep an eye on the fans. You want the game to continue to grow and be successful. So a large part of our agreement is to make sure the quality of the game stays strong. And I think our players recognize that. This is not just an issue because of the economic crisis. This was something we did in May of last year before the economic crisis really hit and went into its full impact. This is something that has to be adjusted. There are a number of corrections that can be made to improve the system for both parties, and most importantly, the quality of our game. So I think our players will recognize that, and I think our players and the owners will work to try to forge something that will allow the game to continue to grow.
Thank you.
With the overlap with other sports during the season, does the NFL ever have to market itself differently? If so, how? And could you tell us a little bit about an area or an aspect of the league that you would like to improve upon during your time as commissioner?
Well, let me start with your first. I don't spend an awful lot of time focusing on what other people are doing. We focus on what the NFL is doing and what we can do better. One of the things that we are probably overly focused on is not assuming that your success is going to continue. That because you're the #1 sport right now, that doesn't guarantee that we'll be the #1 sport 5 years from now. And I said it earlier tonight, you may be #1, but you act like you're #2. And you have to keep taking the initiative to figure out how you can improve the quality of what you're offering. And you do that in advance of a crisis or a problem. And I think that's the hallmark of the NFL. We have always tried to improve the NFL, not just the quality, but the business aspects of the game and the popularity of the game. And our owners come together, our players come together, and we do that collectively. So I think the key issue for us is making sure that we focus on ourselves, not competition. And competition's out there. We look at going to the movies as competition. We look at any entertainment, anything you would do in your free time. We want you to try to spend time involved with the NFL, whether it's buying a ticket, watching on television, watching on NFL.com, watching on your phone, buying a t-shirt. The more we can get you to associate with the NFL, the better off we are. Now I'm going to have you ask your second question again because I forgot it.
Oh, I asked, could you tell us a little bit about an aspect or an area of the league that you want to improve upon?
Well, there's a lot that I'd like to improve because, again, it goes to the same point. We have to continually find ways to improve the game and our business. And I think our conduct or our reputation is probably #1 to me because I think that's what we represent. That's our responsibility. 2, I think we have to find new ways of creating fans and creating value. I want everybody in this chapel to be NFL fans. What can we do to make them fans? And that's one of the reasons we look at a fan conduct initiative in our stadiums. We don't want anyone not to come to our stadiums because of the behavior of somebody else. Not one of my 2 nieces that are here tonight, but I took one of my other nieces to a game along with Bill and Tim, 2 of my brothers, a couple of years ago, and sat in the stands. It happened to be negative 20 degree day, so I had a mask on, but I was able to see what the behavior is in our stadiums, and there's behavior there that's scaring people away from coming back to our stadium. That's not good for us. We want to give people reason to come to our stadium, not scare them away. And the second would be the restructured season. Preseason games do not meet NFL standards. We have to find a better way to sell our game than games that are meaningless. And so we look to do that. And then the continuing evaluation of how we make the game better.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. How large of a problem do you find that the fact that a team has now gone a whole season without winning one game? And do you feel that there's any real way to remedy this, or just hope that the teams can correct themselves as the Dolphins seem to have done the past year?
That's the great thing about the NFL system is that you have teams that can go from last to first very quickly, and that's a hope of. Are you a Lions fan?
No, I'm not. But
okay.
Thankfully.
But that's the way our system is structured. As an example, the Lions, who unfortunately didn't win a game, are picking first in the draft. They have the best draft position, so they have the best opportunity, at least, to improve their team. Now, whether they do that or not is up to their own management and their skills. And they have the economic foundation to be able to do that. That's what's critical to us. But we had 3 teams last year that really had poor seasons the year before, Baltimore, Atlanta, and Miami, and they turned around and they all went to the playoffs with first-year coaches. So I think one of the fundamental premises of the league is that you can go from a poor team to a successful team in 1 year, and it gives everyone hope when the season starts. One of the things I love about draft weekend this weekend is every team gets better.
Yep. Thank you.
This line doesn't seem to be getting any shorter.
All right, I have two questions. The first, kind of going back to what Ty was bringing up with the new rules regarding the safety of the players. You said one of your primary responsibilities is to maintain, the integrity of the game. How do you, what's the dialogue like when you're trying to come up with rules to protect the safety of the players, but like football is a physical game, and guys tackle each other and push each other, and there's going to be a lot of stress that's put on the human body. How do you decide what techniques should be illegal and what should be legal? And the second question is, there's been some talks about the relevancy of the Pro Bowl and how viewership is lower compared to other All-Star games. Is there anything that are in the works to increase the relevancy of the Pro Bowl?
Well, on the first one, it's by analysis on the injuries. What you do is you look at particular techniques, and believe me, our coaches, our players, we reach out to all of them during the season, after the season, and we have multiple meetings to identify those that usually create an increased risk of injuries. As an example, one that doesn't get a lot of attention is what we call the wedge block on a kickoff. It's one of the more dangerous plays in the NFL, and we've essentially eliminated that this offseason. So hopefully that will lead to less injuries on kickoffs. And we'll analyze that. We'll monitor that as the season goes on to make sure that what we intended to do actually occurs. So we analyze every aspect of the game. There isn't a play in the NFL that doesn't get analyzed by Tuesday afternoon after the game. Every single play, every single call, every aspect of it. Your second question, the Pro Bowl, is a good one. What we are trying to do with the Pro Bowl is, for those who aren't as familiar, the Pro Bowl has always been played, or for the last close to 30 years, been played in Hawaii the week after the Super Bowl. We believe two aspects that we're essentially evaluating this year. We're moving the Pro Bowl to the mainland, and we're going to play it in Miami the week before the Super Bowl. So it'll be a part of the lead up to the Super Bowl. So we can create, I think, tremendous interest in our players the Sunday before the Super Bowl and be part of the lead up to the season rather than, frankly, an anticlimactic event in Hawaii the week after the Super Bowl. We think this will be beneficial. We'll see. The results will be determined in January for us, and we'll adapt at that point in time. If the concept works, we'll modify that and try to continue to improve it. But we think there's great interest. Our ratings versus the other leagues, even on our All-Star game, are extremely good and better than most of the other leagues. But it's not a game that's necessarily suited to All-Star. It's a team game, and that makes it somewhat unique and this somewhat of a challenge.
Hi, the NFL has a playoff system, and given your professional expertise, I was just interested in hearing your opinion on if college Division I football should adopt a similar model. Oh,
you're getting me in trouble now.
The president's already spoken.
Yeah. I guess from our standpoint, we love the idea of a playoff because I think people want to know who the best team is, and that's usually determined on the field. And, one of the great things about our playoff system, which we evaluate frequently also, we only have 12 or 32 teams that make the playoffs. And then it's their performance that gets them into the playoffs, and it's their performance that keeps them in the playoffs and determines their success. And I think people, frankly, want to see the performance determine who's number one. And so I probably lean on the side of what the fans want, and the fans want to see a team that they know is the best team in college football, which in any given week could be a different team. That's the nature of sports. It's the nature of particularly football, is a particular team could be better one week and not better the next week. And that's what's so hard about the system of rating a team. One week they may play very well, the next week they don't. So it's part of our game to play the game, and whoever wins is the best team on that given day. I hope I punted on that.
Our guest does have to get back
I'm okay.
to an
That's all right.
airport. Well, I was going to suggest 4 more questions, if that's all right.
They've been standing in line. How about if we stop with the last guy?
We'll stop with the last one.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, I was wondering,
No,
what do
you
you
can
think?
stay.
I
I scared him away.
I was wondering, what do you think the role of the NFL Network will play in the future? Considering you're saying that like all games are on TV for free, however, games are being moved to Thursday night, just being shown on the NFL Network, which doesn't come for free. I was just wondering, do you see like in the future the expansion of more games being shifted to the NFL Network, or if this is just like, what do you think will happen in the future with that?
Well, it's a very good question, but they are on for free in the 2 markets, the teams. We have a rule that all of our games, whether they're on ESPN or the NFL Network or any other paid television service, but those are only 2, have to be shown on free television in the home market. So in the NFL Network games, we go back and we make an agreement with a local station and put that on free television, which is to our detriment in some ways, because that's one of the reasons why cable operators aren't distributing us, because it's on free television. But we believe the NFL Network is critical to our long-term success because people want more football. And we can't, on ESPN, they won't program NFL football or football 24 hours a day. Now, they do a lot of it, but this is our opportunity to talk about football 24 hours a day, market our sport, market our players, and talk about football. You would never have seen the Combine if it wasn't for the NFL Network, which is growing in interest, and it's essentially our tryout for college players. But we can put that on the NFL Network because we control it, and there's demand for that, and there's interest in that. Our issue is we're trying to get distribution, broader distribution, so that it's available to everybody. We don't want to be on a sports tier. And some of the larger cable operators are trying to put us on a sports tier because they know the demand for that will drive people to pay $7 or $8 a month for the sports tier. We don't get that money, by the way, and we don't think it's right for our fans to have to do that. We think we're charging a much less significant cost, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 cents. That is something that we think is critical to our long-term future and success, to have that ability to market our game through the NFL Network.
My question concerns kind of the evolution of the game, more towards the passing game and away from the running game. It seems like more than ever there's a premium on like cornerbacks and left tackles and defensive ends and quarterbacks and all the positions that are revolving around the passing game. And also, I mean, the Patriots barely even ran the ball the year before last. So it seems like even over the last 10 years, like all the rules have really favored the passing game. So I was wondering if you agree that the game is headed more towards a passing-oriented game and higher scoring games, and if you believe it's more important to protect the integrity of kind of what the game was founded on, kind of a run the ball, stop the run attitude, or if it's more important to appeal to the fans that want high scoring and basketball on a football field.
Well, you have to balance that issue. As you say, the game has evolved, and the passing game didn't come about because fans liked it. The passing game came about because that was a better way to score, and people found it more efficient to score and to beat the other team. And that has taken on different generations, going back to Sammy Baugh, to Sid Gilman, to Bill Walsh as an example, and it continues to evolve. And I don't think there's less of an interest in running the game. As a matter of fact, I think most coaches would tell you, if I can't run the football, I'm not going to win the Super Bowl, particularly as the weather gets harsher during the playoffs. And I think there's still a premium on being able to run the football and control the football. People believe in some systems, though, that you can control the football by short passes. That was the Bill Walsh system. That's the so-called West Coast system.
In areas that are foreign, not only geographically, but less aware of the sanctity of the game.
I'm going to try to address all your issues in there, but to start with NFL Europe, which I think was the first part of your question, we didn't believe, and NFL Europe was a league that we created with 8 teams in Europe, and it was had moderate success at best. And what we found was because fans wanted the best football. They didn't want average football, and we weren't putting the best product on the field, and that's why we terminated the league and changed our strategy to focus on giving them the best football, which also is not preseason football. They recognize over there as they become fans that the best players aren't playing, or they come in and play 2 series and then they sit down. So we put regular season games over that are meaningful, so they recognize the advantage of that. There's no way of doing that without taking it away from the fans at home. And that's a balancing act. And that's why we do it in a very limited circumstance. We've actually only done it 3 times. This year will be our 4th. And I think fans recognize, again, it's on television back to their home markets, but they recognize that's part of the growth of the sport. And it's one of the other benefits, frankly, of restructuring the season, adding 2 more regular season games. You would do that, and the net would be that the home fan would not lose any games over any period of time. So creating better quality product gives you the ability to take that overseas. As far as reaching fans, I'd still go back to the digital media. I think that's critical. You know, it used to be we had to go to a local broadcaster who would put us on at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's tough to build an audience that way. Now we can use NFL.com. We can use other digital media to get fans to understand our game. Even, believe it or not, the Madden game, I'm not sure every kid in the world understands it, but we sell a lot of those games internationally. They love it. And it's a video game, but they're learning the game of football at the same time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It seems recently that teams are starting to consider it sort of bittersweet to have a top 10 draft pick because of how much money they have to pay the player. Fans are upset at new players holding out and missing parts of a season or the whole first season, and veterans are upset about how much more money rookies are making than them without ever having proven themselves on the field. Are you going to institute a rookie pay scale like they have in the NBA?
Well, it's not something I can do unilaterally. I've been quite public about my objection to the current system, which, as you point out, pays an extraordinary amount of money to a player who's never played on the NFL field. And I personally believe a player should come into the NFL and perform on that level and then be rewarded, not be rewarded in advance. There's not many systems that do that. And I think we need to change that. But it's one of the things that we have to negotiate with our Players Association. And I think they recognize the difficulty with the system and the problem with the system. And it's not that we're saving money, it's just I believe that money should go to a proven veteran, not to somebody who may not be able to play on the NFL level. We don't know. There's a risk when they make draft choices this weekend. A lot of those young men won't make it in the NFL, and we will have paid them money to play in the NFL. That just doesn't seem right to me.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that it wasn't an easy road that led you to the position you're in today. So in light of that, what would you say is the best quality of yours that allowed you to get to where you are now?
Perseverance or determination. Some people would call it stubbornness, I guess. I am passionate about what I do. And I recognize I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to do what I'm doing. So you just, if you're determined to do something, don't let go of that. Keep a focus on it, and don't let people tell you no. And everything you do at every stage, I was talking earlier about when I was an intern, I was clipping newspapers. Somebody said they needed coffee. I'd run across the street and get coffee for them. Anything you do is going to reflect on you as an individual, and somebody's watching you, and somebody's going to take notice at some point in time. My internship, when I started the NFL, I came back from Pittsburgh. My internship was only 4 months. We went on strike, I think, the 4 days after I got there for 3 months. And I thought, well, this has been fun, but here it goes. And I think the reality is it created opportunities, and people noticed. And they noticed my passion, probably my drive or my determination, and they kept me around. And that gave me other opportunities, and I kept getting other opportunities. So every time you get that opportunity, take advantage of it. And when you stop learning in any particular position, it doesn't mean you have to leave the company, but it means you have to reevaluate where you are and look for a new challenge. Challenges are going to make you grow, and they're going to make you expand your boundaries a little bit. And don't be comfortable. Comfort, everyone wants to be in their comfort zone, but you have to get outside your comfort zone if you want to grow.
like to know, what do you say to those that argue the NFL is not justified in providing such a dangerous sport, yet they do not guarantee contracts, which also leads to things such as teams immediately cutting players and star players looking for the new big contract with a big signing bonus instead of focusing on the long term?
I think that's one of the things that we want to continue to look at with our Players Association, and they're all very legitimate points. I'm not a big fan of guaranteed contracts. I just believe that players should, and the coaches and commissioners should all earn their compensation on their performance. And I think it does affect your performance to some extent when you know you're going to get paid regardless of your performance. Our players play a tough game, as you point out. They have a risk of injury, but they have injury protection. We have that in our current contracts and our current labor agreement, and we would evaluate that and see if there should be other things done. But most players' careers are not ended by injuries. They're ended by performance, and that is the way it should be at the end of the day. And more of our money, unfortunately, is paid in guarantee. Our money comes as a signing bonus. So when you sign a contract in the NFL, if you signed one, you would get a certain amount of money up front. As a matter of fact, our #1 draft choice this Saturday will probably make $30 million without playing it down. That's guaranteed. We can't get it back from them. And so there is a form of guaranteed money. It may not be as significant in other sports, but I think that's what makes our game special also.
Well, I'd very much like to thank the audience and the panel for their excellent questions. And I want to conclude with just one comment. You heard the story in the introduction that our guest started with the National Football League as an intern who was unpaid or barely paid. I don't think Bill Goodell mentioned that he gave up a very well-paying position in the steel industry in order to pursue his passion. That's one of the lessons people may take from this evening. Find your passion and pursue it. Who knows how far it will go. Please join me in thanking Roger Goodell for visiting.
Thanks, Bob.